Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm so excited because I have one of my favorite people in the studio right now. And we've gotten to do a lot of stuff with you recently, but not very often with you in the studio. I'm talking about Christina Adams. And welcome. You guys have heard me wax poetic about her because she is a brilliant author. She is an amazing mom, and she's a great person to sit and spend some time with. You're just a fascinating person. But it really was Christina's book, A Real Boy, I was saying this earlier, that changed my life. That you wrote, see, I'm going to get emotional, but you wrote about your adventure starting with CARD with your son, and it set a path in front of my family that we still follow. This show wouldn't have existed without that book. Let's be real honest about that. But you've been a writer for many years and write on many different things and many subjects, and people should definitely, let's start with your website. Where should they go to find out more about you and see some of the things that you have written?
Fantastic. Thanks, Shannon. My website is ChristinaAdamsAuthor.com, and I try to keep what I'm doing up there. But I do have some articles that are kind of key that people ask me for repeatedly. So if you want to know about some things that I kind of specialize in here and there, I do have the articles on there. So if you want to learn about autism, family issues, camel milk, all kinds of things like that. And plus some of my personal essays that I publish as well. I also write for magazines and things like that.
And on a wide variety of subjects, I have to say. You're a well-rounded individual, but autism is a part of your through line now, because you've been in the autism community for a long time. And we had filmed a series with you that we called Autism and Beyond with Christina Adams, and you guys have probably seen some of those air here. We've got a few more that I think we have not debuted that are about to debut. But you can check out that whole series on YouTube. Just look for it, Autism and Beyond. And it kind of ties in well to what we were going to focus on today, because you're very much a world traveler. You are, it's nothing for you to say, oh yes, when I was, in this far-flung country, when I was in Dubai, and I'm like, when I was in Pittsburgh. But you go to exotic places, Miss Christina, and you recently went to a place that not a lot of Americans have been to recently. You went to Cuba.
I went to Cuba.
Which is so exciting.
It was very, very interesting. So, first of all, I'll say, if you go to Cuba, don't go when I did, because it was unbelievably hot. I just got back, honestly, recently. And but that's the low season, so you can't afford it. It's the beginning of hurricane season, so I suggest you time it. If you want to go cheap, go at the beginning of hurricane season and get one of those portable fans probably you can buy at the swap meet or something. But in all honesty, it was very hot, but it was a lovely place to visit. It's not an easy trip. I will caution you that.
Okay.
If you want to go to a vacation, which technically we're not supposed to go to vacation, they're illegal for U.S. citizens to be tourists. So actually, I went with a little small group, very small, but it was to connect and support with the Cuban people, and that's what U.S. citizens are supposed to do.
And as always, the theme of autism goes with you.
Always.
Because, we were talking about this earlier. I always say if I'm standing in line at the bank, I'm going to end up having a conversation about autism. But oddly enough, that goes for going to Cuba as well. And you and I had a little bit of a conversation beforehand, because I had a great interest in knowing what's happening with autism in Cuba. And you said you were going to be very eyes open and come back and let us know what you saw and heard. And so we're like chomping at the bit here.
Well, it's kind of funny when you talk to people, they're interested in Cuba, and it's kind of funny. I see a little bit of a gender disparity and just the interest about Cuba. A lot of men are fascinated by Cuba. So if you want your husband to watch anything, or your man or your son or anyone, any male in your life, to watch anything to do with autism, try to bait them with this Cuba show, okay?
Okay.
Like, Cuba, really, you won't hear a lot about autism, At least tell them that. So, but it turns out women are not quite as interested in it.
Really?
Because I think they sense that it might be a little bit of a challenging trip, and it was. However, there are some women that are very interested in it, so we can never generalize. But
okay.
That said, it's a way to kind of figure out maybe what you're made of. So going to Cuba at this time of year was a little challenging. However, it was an easy flight straight from LAX and my neck of the woods, Los Angeles. However,
how long?
It was a short flight, really, about 4.5 hours, 5.
Oh, that's not bad
something,
at all.
and direct to Havana.
Wow.
Right, so that was the good part, and it was all the good part. But so we get off the plane, you feel that tropical heat and the extreme moisture saturating you. And one of my things about going to Cuba, because if you're a mother, you always know about the safety belts. It's like, those cars are old. Will there be any safety belts? Will there be any safety belts? So as a kid, I had gotten my face smashed in a dashboard, so I always remembered that. So I wanted to go to get some safety belts. Turns out that there are some American taxis there, maybe not American, but they look American, that they offer safety belts.
Okay.
So you pay a little bit more, you get those. So if you're wondering about that safety belt issue, you can find them. So we go into town, and when you go to Cuba, you have the choice of staying in hotels, which are quite expensive. But if you really want to kind of connect with the Cuban people, which is the purpose if you go as a U.S. citizen, then you can stay in these places called casa particulares. People turn their homes basically into Airbnbs, and you can do that. So we did that.
Amazing.
I also said, air conditioning, please. I would like that. And we got air conditioning, which quit the first night, of course, but it was okay.
And Samantha is showing some pictures because you've already mentioned the old cars,
Yes.
And the architecture is beautiful in Cuba. This was one of the things that you kept mentioning to me, was how gorgeous the architecture was.
Well, I'm an architecture fan. And now I will say the architecture is amazing, but it's also something to think about, because the most notable architecture to me was the Spanish colonial architecture, which is very old, some from 16s. And a lot of those buildings are intact and have been restored, but a lot of them are not. They're in very bad repair. The other part that was interesting from an architecture viewpoint is there's a lot of kind of, let's say, maybe it came from Soviet or communist art, but they have some sculptures and some buildings that are kind of that, I don't know if to say brutalist style or whatever, so there's some of those too. So you see the disparity. Now, in very small parts of Havana, some of the buildings have been restored and they're quite beautiful, but most of Havana is in a challenging condition. So if you want to go there, you have to be prepared. A lot of sidewalks are kind of broken, there's things sticking out. They don't have the infrastructure and the upkeep on the city streets that we are used to in some of the other countries.
So there's 3 pictures though that Samantha's showing up there. Samantha, do you want to full screen those, and we'll talk about the difference in the buildings there, because now the one in the middle and the one on the right here, those are restored. Correct?
Yes, the one on the right and the one in the middle, they've obviously been fixed up and taken care of. Now the one on the left, I think that was a beautiful hotel back in the 50s and 60s, early 60s, because time kind of stopped in Cuba around 1962. That's when the embargo happened.
Yeah.
With the U.S. and a lot of other countries as well followed suit. So you get a building like that was in its heyday in the 50s, and then boom, suddenly time stopped. And so the support that you need to keep your city up, your buildings, your sidewalks, things like that, they do the best they can, I'm sure, but it's very challenging. So you will see beautiful architecture like that in the sort of situation where people are living in it. Laundry is done as well as you can do it, hanging out the windows, things like that.
Fascinating. And we see, it does look like time has stopped. You see on the cars there, it looks like a movie set. And you had mentioned that I did not realize that how difficult it is to get a new car in Cuba. Talk just a little bit about that.
Well, that's one of the historic cars, which they have their mechanics that specialize in just keeping them up and running the best they can. And they do quite a good job. And a lot of people that come there tourist-wise, you can see them tooling around and enjoying the rides in the cars. However, if you, as a Cuban, live there, the most beat up, old, tiny little car is about $25,000. And they only make very, very small salaries. To put it in proportion, the average salary, like a cap, from what I'm told, is about 20 CUCs, which is their currency. And then if you're a highly skilled person like a doctor or a psychologist or something, I think you can make 30 CUCs. It's not a lot. So a lot of people supplement their income with doing tourist type activities now and things and then opening restaurants in their homes, which are called paladars. So we actually dined in people's homes. Wow. It's a restaurant, and they even have like music and nightclub and bars, but you're in an apartment building.
Somebody's home.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, for me, I think maybe one of the reasons why I'm so interested in it, I was born in 1962 in Puerto Rico.
Oh,
my father was
close.
stationed in the Air Force during the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a very stressful time for our family, and I was born into all of that chaos in Puerto Rico. So I've never been to Cuba, but it feels like next door to me, somewhere in my head. And interesting that time stopped there, right? I was born and time stopped. It had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
But that's right where I was born in 1962. So, and we're seeing some of those. Go ahead and full screen those, Samantha, so we can take a look at the difference between a restored building and one that is not, clearly.
Now on the left, that is in Havana, and obviously it's residential. People live there. That to me is a little bit like India. Having been to India, it's a little bit similar where they have beautiful buildings, but the weather and the heat and keeping up the properties take some resources sometimes that just aren't there.
It's a challenge.
It is a challenge. The middle, I believe that might have been an old hospital. And the other one on the right is actually a very interesting part of Havana, the city. Because when you get away from the centers where they disgorge the cruise ship passengers and it looks a little fancier, you go to the side streets, which is where I prefer to be. And I just struck up a conversation with a gentleman. We started talking about autism. And so that was right near where he lived. And so that's where you'll see your typical residents living if they live in Havana. Now, Havana can be a little bit challenging from when you see conditions like that, but it turns out that's a very popular place to live. Everybody likes to live in Havana if they can. I mean, I'm sure there's people that like to live in the country, but it's very desirable. They don't want to leave.
Why?
So I suppose it's, a city
exciting.
center with a lot more things going on, probably some more economic opportunities out in the country. The development is less. Now, there are resorts, I'm told, in Cuba, but I did not really want to go to a fancy modern resort and it wouldn't be that fancy and modern. It would just be a regular resort, having been to the country. However, it's a beach resort. I did go to one resort out of town, and it is a beach resort, but it had been a place where I was told that people from the Soviet Union had sent their children to get away from Chernobyl. So there was an old hospital, and there was an old I guess a theater and an educational center, a classroom, and they were abandoned, filled with weeds, filled with bats living in them.
Wow.
And so they're not able to keep up some of the buildings that you wish they could, because I'm sure people could use them. However, the resort had a swimming pool. They're abandoned homes, but they did have an operating pool. They don't have a lot of funds there. But now they do the best they can.
She's showing some other pictures here, and go ahead and full screen those for us, Samantha, so we can see.
That is the building that is abandoned. Had been educational, theater, classrooms, and I believe that it was used up until 2010. Even I'm told that some people from China used it too, but now it's been empty since then. Now, next to me is a fantastic restaurant in a home, and that lovely lady is a super talented drummer. Wow, she is phenomenal. Wow. So I asked if I could have my picture taken with her, and we did.
Wonderful. I love her top, too.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. Really amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, should we take a short break, and then we'll get a little bit more into how you began to hear about autism and some of the interesting things that you heard.
Special needs and autism. Let's do it.